everyone, this is Amanda Borchell-Dan.
And I'm Jessica Steinberg,
your host for Times Will Tell,
a weekly podcast from the Times of Israel.
Hi, welcome to a special musical Times Will Tell. I'm Amanda Borchell-Dan, speaking this week with composer Andy Teirstein about his new contemporary classical music album, Restless Nation. Like his music, Andy is hard to categorize, and his different occupations can be heard in his music, whether as a field hand or a clown, an actor or a university professor. The inspiration for the pieces comes from all over the globe too, including here in Israel. Today, Andy is a professor at New York University's Tisch School of the Arts, where he can also leverage his work into coexistence arts projects, which we'll speak about later. I've played selections of Restless Nation throughout the conversation. It includes Israeli oud player Yair Dalal and a whole cast of other leading musicians. A big thanks to Novona Records for granting permission. I hope you enjoyed the music and the talk as much as I did, and I'll provide all the information for the album in the program notes. Hi, Andy. Thank you for joining me. Where am I finding you today?
I am sitting in a house 2 hours north of New York City in the foothills of the Catskills.
And listeners, let me tell you, the view from his windows is just green and luscious and beautiful. So thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure, and thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. We're here to talk about your new album, Restless Nation. But first of all, can you tell our listeners a little bit of your background?
Well, I was born in New York City. And when I was in my teens, I got involved with a wilderness school. I traveled in a bus around the country, hiking and camping and sleeping out, learning wilderness skills. And the person who led that, he was a great musician. And everywhere we went, we met people who played the folk music of the different parts of the country that we stayed in. And we'd work for people. We'd work for farmers or different kinds of people, Hopi Indians in Arizona, and whenever we worked for them, we learned their music a little bit and be part of their learn about their cultures a little bit. So this became something I carried with me through my life, and I'm now a professor at NYU. I teach in the dance department. I teach music in the dance department, and a lot of traveling and a lot of learning from other people.
So prior to joining up on the bus, were you a musician at all as a child?
You know, I took piano lessons for a couple of years. I took violin lessons, and I was in a band. So I was playing some fiddle. I was playing some blues violin and things like that, and a basic classical violin.
Tell us a little bit about how you transitioned from childhood violin lessons into fiddler.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of like, when a kid joins a band, like usually you might join a rock band or something. But I guess there were some people in my where I was growing up who were interested in folk music. So we started to play together, and that's how it happened. And I later used those skills to join a small family circus in Mexico and became a musical clown for a short time, where I was... I learned the basic skills of walking the high wire and unicycle and juggling in my 20s, and did that for a while. Was sort of an actor-musician in New York for a little time, but the music was always an essential part of that.
I love how you call basic skills, walking the high wire, unicycle, things of that nature. Yeah, sure. Those are the basic skills. Now, your new album also has this eclectic feel of a salad of different nations' musics. That's obviously intentional. And tell us, first of all, why did you choose this name, Restless Nation?
Yeah, well, when my kids were about 12 and 7, we took them out of school, and I had my first sabbatical of teaching. I had a year sabbatical. So we bought a pop-up camper on eBay and tried to sort of recreate the trip that I had gone on when I was a teenager. We traveled around the country with the kids and homeschooled them. So we went to all these states and learned and met people of different political inclinations and different kinds of people all over the country. And this was in 2008. when we returned, I wrote this string quartet, which became the sort of title piece of the of this album. It's taken a while to record it, but I guess it was something about the country that I was feeling in traveling around. The both us feeling restless, the family feeling kind of restless about the world, and the country in terms of its disagreements, in terms of the different kinds of conflicts of city and country, and people wanting to consume things and other people wanting to go back to nature, lots of different reasons. But that was sort of the feeling we settled on. And when the name came to me, I thought, I wrestled with it for a while, but I decided, let's go for that, Restless Nation.
It's funny how in 2008 you're charting a Restless Nation. I wonder what you would have called it 4 years ago if you had taken this trip. Imploding Nation? What could have come out of that?
Exactly. And forgive me, my dog is a little Restless Nation herself right here. She's barking and so forth, but she's being taken out of the room. So
okay. Good, Doug. Now, there are 4 different sections of the album, and I'm going to talk about them with you in no particular order, except for the one that I chose, essentially. So the first section I'd like to speak to you about is, yes, based in the Middle East, at least, the Azame songs 1 through 4, which feature Yair Dalal. Can you tell me how this came about?
So, and I think we may talk about this later if we have a chance to, but at NYU, I directed a program called Translucent Borders, which was a research program for faculty to look at cultures at borders, to look at dance and music at borders, and explore the role of dance and music at borders. And so as part of this, I interviewed Yair because I'd known about his music forever and always loved his music. I was a big fan. And he, after the interview, he invited me to the desert. So you have to come to the desert. We have a musical trek that we do with my students and some other folks, and you're welcome to come. So I came on this trek across the desert from Ezuz, near the border of Egypt, to Mitzpe Ramon. So we went, and on this trek, it was a musical journey. And it was led by Yair with his dear friends, the Walidi family, which is a Bedouin family. So Adel Walidi and his brothers and family and parents took us across the desert, and it was just every place we went, wherever we stopped, the instruments would come down off of the camels, which was like a Picasso painting to look at the camel, because the camel had all the instruments, the ouds and violins sticking out in every direction from the camel. And then once in a while we would stop for a bite to eat, or bake some bread in the earth like they do when they burn it. And then the instruments would come down, and we would just sit around and play this music. And of course, every night we would play long into the night, and I would just hear these tunes over and over, these beautiful, short, sweet kind of tunes, the hijenis, the camel tunes, the songs that the camel drivers sing as they travel. And it was just so gorgeous to me. And I was faced with the challenge: how do I create music for this? How do I create music that's new music that draws on this inspiration of these short, sweet tunes? Because when you hear new music, it's rarely short, sweet tunes. But so that was the challenge of the piece, and I really, really enjoyed doing that. And I still am very inspired by, when I think about that trip. I'd love to do it again. But that's how that song, Azazme songs came about, because that group of Bedouins are called the Azazme Bedouins.
Okay, we'll hear a clip of it. to ask you, after this has been the soundtrack of my life for the past several days in preparation for this interview.
Wow.
But it sounds as though it's written with both a set piece and improvisation in mind, meaning the string quartet sounds like it is written and it is structured and formed, but the oud playing sounds like there is room for improvisation. And am I hearing that right?
You are? Are you a musician, Amanda? You must be a musician.
I'm the daughter of musicians, so that gives me some street cred.
You've got the street cred. Well, yes, Yair Dalal is such a magnificent oud player. And when he came to New York, we ended up bringing all the people that we had met in these different countries, Ghana and Israel and Cuba. We brought them together in New York at the end to Lincoln Center for a concert. And so we worked together quite a bit then. And Yair, while he was here, I had him record this piece with me, with the quartet, with the Mivos Quartet. And of course, I tried to give him some moments during the piece when I would play it, have the cellist play a long note, or have something happen with the strings that would give some space for Yair to just take it where he wanted to. And sometimes I would give an indication in the music of different directions or some figures, some ornaments, and he would take it and get from A to Z based on what I'd written.
Now, any Israeli who hears it will hear some even childhood folk tunes inside of it, and I highly recommend it. Now, the next section we're going to speak about is definitely my favorite, and it was called Secrets of the North. It's in 9 parts, and it's just beautiful. Tell me about the impetus for this piece.
Thank you so much for those kind words. Well, this piece is inspired by a story by the Danish writer Isak Dinesen, a woman who wrote this story about a sailor boy. It's called A Sailor Boy's Tale. And it's a story of a boy who it's kind of like a first love story. He comes to shore with his he's shipped aboard this boat and he's working for them, and he comes to shore and he meets this young girl, and they have this little almost like a play affair, and he ends up getting in trouble, and he kills somebody, and the protection he finds is with an old woman who has the ability to transform herself into a hawk. And so it kind of works with the Sami people of that part of the world, the indigenous people of that part of the world. And it's kind of like she dipped into those stories a little bit with this sort of mysterious, magical quality. So I called it Secrets of the North. And there's a fuller version of this piece, apart from what you hear on the CD, that has narration and dance in it as well, which we got to perform here in New York State at one point. So what I was fascinated with was the nyckelharpa. The nyckelharpa is the instrument you will hear, the solo instrument, played by the magnificent Marco Ambrosini, a fantastic Italian-German musician who plays all kinds of music on his nyckelharpa. The nyckelharpa is now sort of looked at as the Swedish national instrument. But it's almost similar to a viola, not exactly the same, but similar to a viola, but with sympathetic strings underneath it. So it resonates with this kind of almost like theater-like sound. It's a smaller sound than a violin, but it has underneath it this beautiful glimmering resonance. So what I basically did was, similar to the Azazme songs, I used those tunes that I heard as inspiration.
So let's move on to Restless Nation. I was playing this and one of my 16-year-olds walked in the door and he said, "Whoa, what is this noise?" Because it is definitely the most challenging of all the pieces in terms of being able to appreciate contemporary classical music. Would you agree with that?
That's what I've heard. Yes, that's what I've heard from some folks, from some people. Right. Others feel differently about it. But yes, I think it is more challenging. It's very much in asymmetry. A lot of it's asymmetrical meters. So instead of having like 1, 2, 3, 4, you have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, or even some of it's in 11 or 10, 8 times. So it's got different meters. But my leader and model in all of this was Bela Bartok, the wonderful Hungarian composer who died in New York in the 40s, who collected folk music all over his area and even to Northern Africa. And he incorporated that folk music into his music. And I'll just take 1 minute to describe this because I think it's really interesting. It might be interesting for your listeners that he talked about 3 different ways you could do this. The first was to just take a folk tune and do an arrangement of it, okay, similar to what I did with the Azazme songs. The second would be to create your own sort of imaginary folk tune, and he did that on some beautiful music. And the third way, which is the way that composers should strive to work, he said, would be to become so imbued with the folk tunes that it becomes your mother tongue. And then everything you do is affected by it, although you won't hear any folk tunes in it anymore. And that's what I tried to do with this piece, which has the impetus and the energy and the sort of fire of the rhythmic intensity, I think, of a lot of fiddle music from Appalachia in America, from my country. But it doesn't really have any folk tunes, so to speak. Maybe it has a haunt of a couple of them, but it's driven by that energy.
You can definitely hear the energy, and I hear what you're saying about the rhythm, but in terms of tonality, for somebody like me who's not a musician, as I said, it is very challenging because there's no, as you say, tune behind the song itself. How is one supposed to appreciate that, or how should one appreciate something like that?
Well, when I don't know if you've seen the recent film by Steven Spielberg, West Side Story. I happened to watch it last night. But the thing about West Side Story is it's one of the most iconic of musical theater pieces, and it's thought of as a very, very beautiful. A lot of the melodies are very beautiful, but at the time, people were really angry that there was nothing singable in it. It was really hard for them to hear. So I think that's something that people, if people listen to the piece more than once, they'll start to hear a lot of melody in it. I think there is melody in it. And, it is, we all try to create our own signature style. That's what we do as composers, I think. We want to be original, but, and to find our own voice, like as anybody does. So I think that piece comes the closest to finding my own voice, which might not be the same as, might not be as accessible to some, but I hope that other people will find it actually quite accessible and quite even melodic, because I think there are a lot of melodies in there.
So I'm going to listen to it again with your words in mind. Now, the final section from the album that we'll discuss is very melodic, the Letter from Woody section.
Yes, well, I've had a long association with Woody Guthrie, not with him personally, but with his music and his life, because I've performed as an actor in a show called Woody Says for many years. It's a show about Woody's life and about, so those of you who don't know, you probably know Woody Guthrie from the famous song, This Land Is Your Land, which most school children learn. But particularly in Haifa, we found a lot of Americans who really knew ex-Americans who knew Woody's work, because he was a very strong protest singer and singer for peace and protest music, and he reflected the times and the people around him and wrote about the migrant workers and all kinds of things. So it really, the show that we do is about the workers' movement in the U.S. mostly, but in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, the workers' movement. As it tells Woody's life, it's really the story of that movement that he helped to push forward. But this piece, Letter from Woody, at one point I was invited by the Woody Guthrie Publication Foundation to come to their archives and look through their archives. So I found all these lyrics, and I found a series of notebooks, school notebooks, each one a letter written from Woody to his soon-to-be wife, Marjorie. Marjorie was a dancer in the Martha Graham Company, and Woody was hired to come in and play his music on his guitar, but he could never play the same song twice the same way. So the dancers were really confused because they didn't know how many measures to wait in between the verses. And so they had Marjorie sit down and help him to work that out, like how much time to wait between each verse. And they worked on this for several nights in a row, and eventually they fell in love. But she was married at the time to somebody in Philadelphia. She became pregnant with Woody's child. So he wrote her, she went home to think about this, and he wrote her this series of notebooks, entreating her to come to be with him, and in the end she did, and they gave birth to Arlo Guthrie, for instance, and Nora Guthrie. So so that's basically, again, this is one of those pieces that is written for dancer, folk musician, and orchestra. But for this CD, we just did the orchestra version, and I played harmonica on the introduction to it.
Hearing harmonica in the midst of a symphony orchestra is just stunning always. Why did you choose this particular instrument?
Because the whole idea of making an orchestra piece from a Woody Guthrie song, it's kind of like you're putting something, two different parts of society together. I mean, really, the orchestra is something that came from the sort of West European aristocracy in a certain sense. I mean, and Woody Guthrie's music is music of the people, of the hobo, of the tramp, of the one who's alone on the road and the train, that kind of thing. So the harmonica just personifies for me the hobo aspect of music. It's something you carry it in your pocket anywhere you go. You take it out, it's your friend. You can play pretty music, you can play blues music on it. So I felt like I had to have something right off the bat to counter the sort of colossal energy of an orchestra, and that was the harmonica.
I'd like to discuss some of your other projects. You touched on it earlier, the Translucent Borders project. Tell me about the impetus about this project, essentially.
Yes. Well, Translucent Borders. So let me tell you, we at NYU, where I teach, we have, I don't know how many, maybe 25 or 23 different satellite schools around the world. So we have an NYU Abu Dhabi, for instance, and NYU Shanghai, and NYU in Paris. So we have all these different places. So at one point, they came around to all the different departments and asked for ideas. How can we engage these different NYUs? So I made this proposal. I said, if you want to go to a place that has a lot of different cultures in one place and use that as a model, go to NYU Tel Aviv. Because in NYU Tel Aviv, we have a beautiful NYU Tel Aviv, and there are cultures. People think of it as just Jewish and Arab or something like that in their minds. But there's so many different kinds of people there. There's so many different communities. There's so many different cultures that came together in that area. So why not use that and look at the music and dance there and see how, because look what's happening with dance in Israel now. It's amazing. And all the different music, the Mizrahi music and the Ashkenazi music, all these different kinds of music and the Arab influences. And look at that and then use that as a model for all the different places around the world, NYU Ghana and NYU Abu Dhabi, and how can different cultures come together and work. So they said, this is great. Here's a bunch of money, take this money and go and make this work. So we did NYU Tel Aviv and NYU Ghana, and we went to Cuba, and we also went into the West Bank. And to the extent we were able to, we brought a lot of people together at the Suzanne Dalal Center and worked with dancers and musicians. So really it started in Israel, this whole project, Translucent Borders. And the idea is to look at what happens when you have two people with really different cultures who are juxtaposed either at a border physically or economically or just culturally, if they're at these borders. And from 2015 to 2019, we did these projects again and again. And in the end, we brought people from all these different places together in New York and did some performances and a residency at the Jacob's Pillow dance residency and also at Lincoln Center.
One of the things I noted on your website, our time is drawing to a close, is that you're also a filmmaker. And I had the privilege of watching Cluck Old Hen, which includes dance and music and more than anything, humor.
My old hen, she's a good old hen. She lays eggs for the railroad man. Sometimes one, sometimes...
Tell me a little bit about this project before we say goodbye.
Great. Well, my son Max was learning Appalachian dance styles. So I made this film, which it is a little bit funny, just based on a tune, an old Southern tune called Cluck Old Hen. And it's the banjo that is the heart of that. The banjo, I have a fretless banjo that really kind of clucks when it plays. It really plays a very down home kind of style. And so I played in that film accordion, banjo, juice harp, fiddle, I think that was what I played, and I just used all my family members in the film for different parts, and we had a good time, and it was just a lark, just a fun kind of thing.
I'll definitely put a link in the program notes. It's just a pleasure to watch in bite size, so you can eat it like a hard-boiled egg.
Yes.
Hen, she's a good old hen. She lays eggs for the railroad. Sometimes 9, sometimes 10.
Andy, thank you so much for all your time. I really appreciate it and enjoyed our talk.
Oh, thank you so much, and thank you very much for listening carefully to Restless Nation. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to Times Will Tell from the Times of Israel, and thanks to our producer, Gilad Brownstein.
Please subscribe wherever you find your podcasts and check out our daily briefing news show every Sunday through Thursday.
Like what you hear? Consider rating us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to spread the word.
Until next week.
Shalom.